What are the basic necessities for a person, do you think? Of course, there's food, water, social interaction, and maybe even Wi-Fi. But think carefully. What do our households do? And what do our loved ones do? And what does the government do that we don't even realize plays a huge importance in our lives? They provide security. In fact, security is one of our greatest necessities, just behind our physiological needs, like food and water. And it's why our government spends billions on the military and the police. We want to feel safe walking around our neighborhoods, so can't transgender people feel safe as well? In San Francisco, known to be one of the most LGBTQ accepting cities in California, transgender people continue to get targeted for their identity. As a result of this issue, I discovered the lack of healthcare benefits, the influence of racism, childhood abuse, and the overall uninformed society we live in I found through transgender violence. My purpose is to inform everyone of the lack of benefits that gender-based hate crime victims face. Transgender individuals face violence every day, and those crimes reveal many issues on basic human rights within our community. First, I want to discuss my initial inspiration for this topic, a chapter from Local Actions titled The Calculus of Pain, Violence, Anthropological Ethics, and the Category Transgender, written by David Valentine. He tells us of a woman named Vianna Faye, someone who he had cruised down the cool, dangerous streets with in a car she was able to afford from all her sex work. It was 1970 and she was looking for another date. As a transgender person, she didn't have many other options, but she had greater plans ahead of her. She planned to kick sex work and get a real job and stop using her street name Felicia for good. But she never could. She was found murdered by a 12-year-old boy who was her neighbor, stabbed on the back, neck, and chest. Valentine found out about it almost accidentally, overhearing it from Vianna Faye's roommate. She even blatantly exclaims, "The cops said I could have her stuff. Wasn't that cool?" He was so shocked he didn't know whether to yell at her or to cry, but all he could do was leave in a daze. This story of Vianna Faye fills me with a similar rage and disgust. Valentine's effective use of pathos lit a spark, and I was inspired to go deeper into research. Just the passion and the anger swelling in his tone alone can make anyone feel how unfair it was for a victim like Vianna Faye. She clearly didn't like her life as a sex worker, and she was working to improve herself. She had plans, goals, and a future to look forward to, only for it to be viciously stolen away. He could do nothing but just stand idle in that moment, and so he took research into his own hands as well. Now, why is San Francisco a location of interest for transgender hate crimes? With San Francisco being one of the more LGBTQ accepting communities, many people are open about their identity within the city. There are pride parades held annually every Pride Month in June, and everyone's identities are celebrated. Unfortunately, it also makes them easier targets than anywhere else. I have also grown up in the Bay Area all my life, so doing research in an area I'm familiar with holds a lot more meaning than it does compared to other places. The fact that so many people are becoming victims to violent crime in an area so close to me is terrifying to think of. Here's a video of transgender women living in San Francisco trying to make a change.
Everyone around me in my life told me that I would have a better life when I came to San Francisco. So many trans people come here like refugees from other cities in the United States. As a Black trans woman, as a teenager in San Francisco, I learned very quickly that while San Francisco affirmed me legislatively, socially, I had walked into job interviews and been laughed at. I had been spit on the street.
In a lot of ways, we've been dehumanized and we've been denied access and discriminated against in many, many ways.
When we talk about trans women of color, there are so many layers of oppression that they have to deal with. We realize
These women found San Francisco to be a place that was safe, yet they still felt unsafe within their community.
Everyone around me
And the first thing I discovered through gender violence crimes is that a lot of gender-based hate crimes are highly influenced by race, based on an article by Akua Oyomera called Experiences and Factors Associated with Transphobic Hate Crimes Among Transgender Women in San Francisco. In this study, transgender women were asked to participate in the study of HIV, and it revealed that many women were victims of transphobic hate crimes. Not only were half of all the crimes stated not reported to the police, it turns out that there were more violent crimes based on what race the victims were. According to Yomera's research, among those who reported a hate crime experience, Black and Latina transgender women reported a higher prevalence of battery with a weapon, and white transgender women and other ethnicities reported a higher prevalence of sexual assault. Race plays a huge role in why they're being targeted, revealing an even larger problem with human rights. Gender-based violence and being influenced by race tells us that these hate crimes are also deeply rooted in racism. A majority of gender-related crimes being Blacks and Latinos brings minority communities into the picture. Yomera states, structural factors such as homelessness, poverty, unemployment, sex work, incarceration, and housing discrimination have been associated with trans women's risk for violence. We see that it isn't only because of their gender identity that they're being targeted, but also because of their race. In order for these victims to get the basic human rights they deserve, the community needs to be more aware of the systemic racism and its relativity to violence. Then we come to realize that transgender women don't have the same benefits in healthcare as everyone else does. In San Francisco, there are only a few projects and developments towards helping victims in transgender. The National Institute of Health currently doesn't have any resources specifically for transphobic violence. Here are the accounts of many transgender individuals who are afraid to go to hospitals.
My name is Leo Sell, and my pronouns are they, them, their.
My name is Sophia Stanford, pronouns she, her.
I'm Gray, and my preferred pronouns are he, him.
Robin Kanauer-Haza, and I use feminine pronouns, so she, her, hers.
My name is Luke Jude, and I prefer he, him pronouns.
My name is Chloe Flora. My preferred pronouns are she or they.
99% of the time when I go to the doctor, I'm anxious and nervous.
Even though insurance and driver's license and everything says female, you really don't know what to expect.
Yeah, I don't think I know any trans person that went through the medical system and had a nice time with it. Not in this country.
I haven't gone to the dentist in 4 or 5 years because it's just such an uncomfortable experience.
I know people who, if they sprain their ankle, will just wrap it up and put some ice on it rather than going to the ER and having an x-ray done because it's just not worth the stress.
This brings the attention to how a majority of hospitals don't provide the right equipment and right type of health care for transgender victims. These clinics and programs have to be opened in San Francisco because there aren't enough doctors trained in handling transgender necessities. Healthcare is a basic human right, yet a majority of hospitals still don't have a safe space for them. Now that there are a lot of more people in California identifying as genders they weren't assigned at birth, it's important that California's healthcare system is more aware and inclusive. Continuing on with health, from Toru Nomoto's study, Social Support, Exposure to Violence, and Transphobia, transgender women suffer from depression and other undiagnosed mental illnesses from violence. Many transgender sex workers are reported to have depression, and a large portion were hate crime victims. Without a safe space to talk about their stories of physical violence and sexual assault, these victims have a higher susceptibility towards mental issues and depression. To add on to that, it isn't easy for transgender people to find high-paying jobs and have to rely on sex work for money. According to Nomoto, sex work is linked to high-risk situations, such as substance abuse, unsafe sex, and sexual and physical abuse. Without proper health care, many people are at high risk of drug addictions and death. Having a proper facility to treat these patients can be enough to change and save many lives, considering suicide. These victims of sexual trauma further prove that the state does not provide enough security for the mental health of transgender people. Having rights to healthcare is a basic human right in California, yet a lot of victims refuse it out of fear and shame of their identity. There are always mental health resources for victims out there, but clearly it is not enough. A lot of young students also report that they are being bullied in their school, according to a study called Whole of School Approaches to Supporting Transgender Students. Children are beginning to become more comfortable with identifying as a different gender, but as a result, they get targeted as well. Cisgender parents of transgender children at primary or elementary school levels also report high levels of bullying of their children by their cisgender peers. The lack of understanding from the education system leads to a lot of confusion and doesn't provide a safe environment for young children. All these children are in danger of potential violence and discrimination. It's important that we teach kids gender diversity so that it's not a foreign idea to them. Some actions have already been put into combating homophobia and transphobia. To list a few, there are policies for transphobic bullying and discrimination, inclusive dress codes, and there have been all-gender bathrooms that have begun to be implemented. If these inclusive practices are spread outside of San Francisco and outside of California as well, our community can be more accepting of these differences. Children will be able to grow up and learn in a safer environment. Another thing that transgender violence has also allowed us to discover is that many transgender individuals encounter abuse early in life, based on an article called Childhood Abuse Among Transgender Youth, written by Jason Rafferty. The Human Rights Campaign declared anti-transgender violence to be a national epidemic due to the number of transgender homicides. This led to a study on gender-diverse children, in which about 1,863 children were questioned. According to Rafferty, TGD adolescents experienced higher rates of psychological, physical, and sexual abuse compared to that of their cisgender peers. During the process, a majority of children weren't even valid accounts, since many of them were instructed to identify as a gender that they've been assigned at birth. This study on childhood violence reveals that many cisgender parents might not even be aware that they are causing gender dysphoria in their children. Many parents still raise their children by establishing traditional gender roles, and some abuse their children for even questioning their identity. Children deserve to have the freedom and not be contained by labels. It's hard for many parents to let their children discover themselves on their own terms, but doing so will prevent their children from suppression of identity and give them freedom. So looking at all these issues again created by gender-based crimes reveals how much the government needs to work on protecting the livelihoods of these individuals. If we choose to ignore violence, it will continue to create an even greater issue onto the already pre-existing issues discussed already. Transgender people deserve to have the safe environment and equal rights just as everyone else.